rock was never just a genre, it was a shockwave. Through the Ramones' stripped-down sound, the Sex Pistols' political fire, and the Misfits' horror-inspired style, punk built a visual and musical language that still shows up everywhere in today's pop culture. Good evening, Dr. Council and fellow classmates. My name is Emily Etheridge. Today I have the pleasure of informing you about the impact of punk rock. Today I will discuss punk rock's origins, bold visuals, social messages, and how bands like the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, and the Misfits help shape modern music and media. According to the article from Geerfried Ambrosch, the genre of punk rock's origins can be traced back to the mid-1970s from the UK's working class youth. The creation of this movement stemmed from cultural, social, and economic preconditions that gave rise to the movement. In the UK, punk was mainly a movement of frustrated working class youths who occupied London's high-rise blocks, as well as families whose livelihoods were threatened by the declining economy. By the mid-1970s, high unemployment rates and poverty had begun to plague the British Isles. Tension between citizens and immigrants from other Commonwealth countries was on a rise and often escalated to violence. As a result of this, the British society became increasingly conservative, holding on to traditional values, which symbolized by Queen Elizabeth II. The Sex Pistols have a well-known song called Anarchy in the UK. This protested social, economic, and political strategization of the 1970s Britain. The album cover itself symbolizes the rejection of traditional values in the UK of the time. As journalist Scott Stalcutt had discussed, in America, punk emerged as a middle-class phenomenon and a reaction of feelings from the social and cultural alienation of suburban life. The Ramones, which were the New York's counterparts to the Sex Pistols, made references to suburbia, critiquing American culture as a whole. The Ramones' music was like the Sex Pistols, but they had taken more of the sound of the 1950s and 60s pop and rock, which made their sound a little bit more lightsome. Cultural, historical, and socio-economic differences in the respective dominant cultures have made their marks on the punk scene. Now that we know where punk began, let's look at what makes it instantly recognizable, bold visuals and sound that turn punk into its own identity. The Misfits were heavily inspired by horror movies and poetry of Edgar Allan Poe and many science fiction works. This is discussed in the documentary We Are 130H, which goes over the entire history of the Misfits band. Their logo is heavily recognized and associated with all things Halloween and spooky. The Ramones mainly looked to America's pop culture past for aesthetic inspirations. So they were widely known for their leather jackets, sunglasses, and unruly hair. The Sex Pistols tried to cultivate a dystopian aesthetic, utilizing items of bondage fashion, symbols of deviant behavior, and references to radical politics. The famous fashion designer Vivienne Westwood was the mastermind behind the Sex Pistols aesthetic, creating their iconic punk look through her store Sex, which was co-owned by their manager, Malcolm McLaren. She had designed provocative anti-establishment clothing, including their famous God Save the Queen t-shirt and graphics. She would later become a huge icon in the fashion world due to her punk and unconventional designs of the time. Finally, punk rock's biggest legacy is how it reshaped modern music and media that still influences artists to today. The public was left with the impression that there had been a huge gap between the late 70s and early 90s, causing the common misconception that punk was basically non-existent throughout the 80s. In 1991, America had a punk revival, or renaissance, making the punk sound and look more popular with a new mainstream mainstream audience. The enormous media attention of the neo-punk or grunge bands had distorted punk's historical trajectory. The basic punk rock sounds, such as distorted guitar riffs and simple riffs, reached the mainstream America in a different way, namely through the Seattle grunge scene with the band called Nirvana. Following Nirvana, Green Day was the first punk band who had broke into mainstream. Prior to Green Day, the new age punk scene was already dubbed as grunge, which is now classified as a subgenre of punk. After today's speech, I would like for you to remember a few key things. Punk grew from the 1970s as a loud response to frustration and inequality, especially among the working class youth. Punk isn't just a genre, it is something that you can see with bold fashion, album art, and imagery that still shows up all over pop culture media today. Punk's legacy is everywhere. Thank you for your time and have a good night.